When I look at photos of my parents from the 80s and 90s, I am struck by how similarly we are dressed. I've seen these photos for decades now. I remember seeing them for the first time when I was little. And earlier on in my life, I would look at these photos and think, what are these people wearing? This looks ridiculous. And then bit by bit, everything that was in style in the 80s and 90s feels like it's coming back. The jeans, light wash jeans, baggy jeans, cuffing your jeans and cuffing your sleeves. The Converse, the high top Converse. I look at those photos of my parents now and I actually think to myself like, dang, I like what they're wearing. Minus the hair. Who knows, maybe 2 years from now we're all gonna have big poofy hair again. I think about these two people that had me, that created me in their late 20s and early 30s. They did things that are back in style now, taking film photos. It's like we could probably be friends. I've inherited a lot of things from these two people, a lot of good things, and some things, a lot of things that I've struggled to accept. The good and the bad. When I think about the 26 years that I have shared with my parents in this life, there are three phases. In early childhood, my parents were like superheroes. They were kind of like demigods. They could do no wrong. They just solved things. It's funny to know this now, looking back, that they had their own marital challenges. We have spoken extensively about the challenges that they had in raising me, because I was a volcanic bundle of energy. But I wasn't aware of any of these things. All I saw were these two people that were much larger than me, that loved me, and just took care of things. I think in early life, because of that perspective, you want to emulate your parents. You want to be like them. And then from, let's say, I don't know, age 10 maybe, all the way to age 20, is the second phase of this relationship, which was marked by a departure from these early life views that I had of them. You start to see their flaws. You start to see that these people are not perfect. It's an interesting period of transition, right? Because I'm becoming every day less a child, but I'm not an adult yet responsible for myself. It was like me developing my own identity, my own ego. And look, I've always appreciated my parents, but there was a strong feeling at times throughout this second phase of my life where I was like, I am not going to be like these people. I appreciate them, I love them, but I'm not going to be like them. There were things that they did that would annoy me a lot. In particular, my father. He had these sensitivities to noise and to stimulus that drove me crazy because, again, I was this big energy, I was all over the place, and I'd make a lot of noise. And I would look at this guy, my father, and think to myself, like, ugh, what an unattractive quality that is to be so sensitive to noise. And this continued throughout my teenage years, culminating in an experience I had with my father where we were traveling and working together for 6 months. We recorded a podcast episode talking about that entire experience if you want to know more. I will link to that in the description below if you want to check it out. But all you really need to know is that it didn't pan out the way we thought. We didn't see eye to eye on a ton of things. There was a lot of ego battle stuff happening, a tremendous amount of tension, and shortly after that, I moved out from living with my parents. And that marks the beginning of this third phase of life that I find myself currently in with relation to my parents. And living on my own and figuring out who I am as an adult has come with like little realizations all the time. Bits and pieces of the puzzle are coming together and I'm getting a sense of who I am. Having distance from my parents helps a lot, but I'm also accumulating more life experience as an adult, which is really important because I judged my parents on who they were as adults, not having been an adult yet, and now I am. By that I mean, I was looking at my parents at age 25, 35, 40, what have you, but as like a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old. Now I am 26, and so my experiences as a 26-year-old are more comparable to their experiences when they were in their 20s. And it has been fascinating to realize that we have a lot of similarities, way beyond how we dress. You know, I've come to realize that I have all of the same sensitivities to noise and overstimulus as my father. This is something I did not know about myself. But now that I do know this about myself, now that I have experienced what it feels like to be bombarded with noise, to be overstimulated, I have so much more empathy for my dad. There are other weird things that I've inherited from my parents. I work a lot like my mother. I have this sort of obsessive approach to creativity and creative projects. I can lose hours at a time working on things. I often have many different things going at once. Genetically, I've inherited strange things from them. My mom has this weird thing where the bone inside of her mouth continues to grow. I think it's entirely harmless, it's not visible. But I'm pretty sure I'm developing the same thing. There are parts of my dad's legs where he has lost hair, and I think I think the same thing is happening to me. There are so many similarities in our personality-based life decisions. You know, my parents ran their own business way before I ever was autonomous doing my own thing. And I judged them so hard for how they ran that business, for like financial mistakes that I thought they made. And then here I am now making a lot of similar decisions. You know, I scaled up my business, I hired a bunch of people and ended up not loving doing that. I struggled with feeling disconnected from my own creative work, and I realized that I'm happier scaling things back in exactly the same way they did. So I look at the decisions they made with their lives in such a different light as well, with a lot more empathy and a lot more recognition of the dynamics that were at play. I'm perpetually unsatisfied and always experimenting with new things. My parents did that for decades before I was even around. I'd think to myself when I was little, like, why don't you just stick with one thing? You know, I remember my dad wanted to open a wellness center, and then he didn't. After a few years of exploring that idea, his interests shift. And I was like, why didn't you do that? And now I look at myself and I'm like, okay, wow, I see. So one year I want to run a podcast, the next year I want to make short films, the year after that I want to write a book. Like, I'm the exact same. And of course, we're not the same people. We have our many differences, but it has been very sobering for me to recognize and to continue to discover the amount of similarities we do have. I remember going through my intense self-improvement phase and feeling like, dang, I wish my parents were doing this as well, being more disciplined, building those good habits and whatnot. And I later discovered that they had explored self-improvement decades before I did, with Tony Robbins and what have you. And then they've gone more in a spiritual direction, and it gets a lot more nuanced, and it's a little bit less rigid and superficial, if you will. It's not just like, what time do you wake up and what do you eat? There's a lot more going on, and I've gone on the same sort of journey. Like, if you've been following my videos for the last few years, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, it's just something I've been contemplating a lot lately, because I've realized you can't run entirely from your nature, nurture, upbringing. We get marked in many ways by what we come from. It's not like a permanent thing. This is malleable. You know, the way I see it is I'm building off of what my parents have done. They did their best. I think they did a lot more for me than their parents did for them. And I hope that I can do the same thing. Because for better or for worse, I'm going to pass down things that are probably triggering to my children. I have a grumpy side. I can be very impatient. I'm highly opinionated about a variety of things. I don't agree with everything my parents say and do. I don't like everything they say and do. There's still a lot of stuff they do that triggers me. But being intensely judgmental about that, I'm realizing, just holds me back. That's a fear-based response. It's like, oh God, I don't want to be like these people. But I think as I'm growing in my acceptance of who they are, it's creating more space for me to become who I want to be more realistic about who I am and what I'm working with, instead of being in denial. The truth of the matter is, I am not my parents. I am my own person. Yes, there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of similarities shared, but I could never be my parents, even if I had tried to be. There's just something emotionally triggering about someone looking similarly to you. It's a really powerful mirror to you. And so I think the things that rub me the wrong way about my parents have a lot to say about me. It's not about me changing my parents, it's about me learning about me. So those are a few reflections I've had about growing up and the similarities that I'm either developing or have always had and never realized with my parents. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you'd like to follow along and get more of my reflections, there's a link to my newsletter in the description below. You can also listen to this in audio form only if you prefer. You just look up No Backup Plan wherever you get podcasts. All right, I'll see you soon.